The topic of today's talk is acceptance of things as they really are. A lot of meditators like to say, just accept things as they really are and come back to the breath. Well, it's not that easy, isn't it? There are a lot of things that as a layperson or even as monks we have to consider and reflect and evaluate in terms of concepts and other criteria, other value systems. So it's more than just the in-breath and the out-breath. And so to accept things has become sort of a cliche these days, not only among Buddhists, but also in counseling and in psychotherapy. In fact, there is one particular type of psychotherapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, which originated in the UK, and it seems that it's now sweeping the world of psychotherapy in a big way. This ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, makes use of mindfulness, and I've actually talked about this in some of my talks. If you have listened to some of my CDs, you could perhaps know what it's all about. Anyone of you here who has listened to any of my audio CDs remember ACT? You do? How many of you remember? Very few. ACT is acceptance commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment therapy, developed in the UK, and is a bit different from mainstream psychotherapy. First of all, because mainstream psychotherapy is based on this premise that there is such a thing as psychological normality, which means that most people are normal psychologically, and those who are neurotic or psychotic are considered abnormal. So their premise is that basically human beings are psychologically balanced and normal. But acceptance and commitment therapy questions this assumption based on research findings, peer-reviewed research papers, which show that a large number of the human population is actually suffering psychological stress in various ways. And depression is one of the most debilitating diseases, you could say, or illnesses that is sweeping the world right now. There are also many research papers that show that people suffering from psychological stress are increasing every day, and they feel that the assumption of mainstream psychotherapy is faulty. On the contrary, they postulate that thoughts or thinking in the human mind are actually destructive by nature, and it is all based on the way we think, based on the verbalization of our thoughts, ideation and conceptualization. Because human beings can think, it is both a boon and a curse. On the one hand, precisely because we can think and conceive of various concepts and ideas, then we can plan for the future. We can come up with making advances in technology that are supposed to make life more convenient for us, but also more complicated and more stressful. On the other hand, animals are not able to think, or they feel that animals don't think. But I think that animals do think, but in a very elementary way. Animals also have concepts. If you study their behavior, you will know that they have pride and ego, and they also have territorial aggression. If you look at how dogs behave, they try to assert their authority or superiority over other dogs. So you can see that there's also some sort of thinking going on, but maybe more elementary in nature. Anyway, their basic premise is that precisely because human beings have this ability to think, they also think themselves into stressful situations. Look at all our emotional distress. How we feel emotionally is actually a result of how we think, isn't it? How you interpret a situation, how you perceive a situation. And if you don't question your thoughts, if you don't question the rationale behind your thoughts, or how your thoughts are constructed, what they are based on, and you simply believe your thoughts and keep on thinking, you could very well be creating suffering for yourself without your knowledge. Why? Because our thoughts sometimes are based on certain assumptions and expectations which are not accurate, and sometimes even untrue. So if we simply listen and believe in all our thoughts without actually questioning their source, their rationale, the assumptions and expectations behind them, then we get into trouble for nothing. This ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, makes use of 6 principles, and I have actually created an acronym for these 6 principles using a more Buddhistic terminology that we can all relate to easier, because they use quite psychological terms which we may find a bit difficult to understand and relate to. The acronym that I created is DABOPA, DABOPA. I couldn't come up with something more catchy like Pepsi Cola. That's the closest that I can come, okay? DABOPA. D means to dissociate or disidentify. That means we don't identify with our thoughts. For most of us, even though we are Buddhists and we believe in the concept of non-self, we still think that our thoughts are us. We are our thoughts belong to us, or they constitute our self. Right? Sometimes when you're aware of your thoughts and you don't like your thoughts, you have dirty thoughts, you have malicious thoughts, you have thoughts of anger, of conceit, of envy or jealousy. And then being Buddhist, sometimes you recognize those thoughts and you know that they are unwholesome, right? And then you chide yourself, hey, how can I have such dirty thoughts or such unwholesome thoughts? Don't you chide yourself? Right? Isn't that identifying with it? Identifying with those thoughts? Because you think that those thoughts belong to you. And you have an idea of how you should be. I'm a Buddhist, so I should be holy, I should be virtuous, I should not have such unwholesome thoughts. Yeah? That is also another identification. So you're identifying with this idea of how you should be, and you're also identifying with the thoughts, thinking that they are your thoughts. So you suffer because you identify with the thoughts. On the other hand, if you have wholesome thoughts, generosity, open-mindedness, receptivity, patience, forgiveness, and understanding, and you see all these qualities within yourself, and you can also feel very proud. Oh, you see, I'm such a good Buddhist. See, you're also identifying with those thoughts. As long as you identify with the thoughts, whether they are wholesome or unwholesome, you're in for suffering. Okay? And this applies to people who are depressed or people who are suffering from low self-esteem. It's because they identify with their thoughts, thinking that they are their thoughts. That's why they suffer. So the first step is to disidentify from the thoughts. Thoughts are just thoughts. They're not you. They arise because of conditioning. Many levels of conditioning. Let me give you an example. If you happen to be angry at someone whom you're not supposed to, for example, your parents, when your parents grow old, they tend to be forgetful, and some of them become incontinent. So when you're taking care of your parents, you sometimes become impatient and become irritated, and you scold them. I've told you so many times, you should clean yourself properly before you do this and do that. After you do this and do that, but they forget. They forget to switch off the lights, they forget to clean themselves, they forget to close the door, and so forth. And you get very irritated, and you scold them, get angry at them. And then suddenly you realize that you shouldn't be angry at your parents because they have spent so much time and effort and also money in bringing you up, and you should be grateful to them and support them. So when you have such a conflict in your mind, one is that you're irritated and you scold them, and then suddenly you realize that you shouldn't be doing that. Then you regret and you chide yourself, oh, how can I be such an ungrateful son or daughter? How can I have such thoughts? And you feel bad about it, right? So this is double suffering. First, you suffer because you're irritated. Secondly, you suffer because you regret that you had such a thought, thinking that you are supposed to be a good daughter, a good son, and you're not supposed to have such thoughts, but such thoughts arise. And the second suffering comes about because we identify with the thoughts, right? It is my thought, it is me. I, the sense of I, the image of I is supposed to be such and such. So it's because of this identification that we multiply our suffering. In the first place, being irritated also comes about because of certain assumptions and expectations. You have said that many times, and you assume and expect your parent to be able to remember instructions, simple instructions, and you've said it so many times. But is that a valid and accurate assumption or expectation? Yeah, you don't question that, you just believe the thought. And because of that, you cause suffering for yourself. The irritation arises, you scold the parent, and then after that you regret. So all this comes about because of identification, for one thing, and unquestioned rationale in your thinking and emotion. So in this ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, their first principle is to disidentify yourself from your thoughts. The thoughts are not me, they are not mine, they are just products of past conditioning and certain assumptions and expectations. That's the first principle, D. A means to accept. Accept the fact that the thought has already happened. If it is an irritable thought, it's an angry thought, it will produce certain feelings in your body. We call it an emotion. You feel miserable, right? What happens to you when you get angry? Your heartbeat increases, you breathe faster, heat emanates from your heart, you feel tense, you feel congested in the heart area, and you might even feel a sourish feeling in your stomach, in your guts, right? So these are all manifestations of an angry thought. An angry thought has actually triggered off the production of certain amino acids in your body produced by the glands. And these are being secreted, affecting the healthy cells in your body, and that creates these miserable physical sensations on top of having that unpleasant thought. So when you identify with the thought, you reject it, thinking that you should not have that thought because you have that image of yourself. And that reaction also is a rejection, which is also unpleasant. It is another form of aversion, another form of anger. So the first thought of irritation, of anger, produces this first round of neuropeptides that causes miserable sensations in the body. And the second round of regret and chiding yourself produces another round. And if you cannot stop yourself from continuing this process of thinking and blaming yourself, you will continue to produce all these amino acids and feel miserable. Okay, once you feel miserable, you want to get rid of that feeling, right? You don't like that feeling. So that is also another thought, another aversion that arises. And that also will cause the production of even more amino acids, more neuropeptides. And so it's like a very vicious cycle, and keep on producing all these things until sometimes it becomes so worked up that you cannot even sleep at night. So the second principle is to accept. Accept the fact that the thought has already occurred. You cannot undo it. Accept the fact that this unwholesome, unpleasant thought has produced all these chemical reactions in your body and you're feeling miserable. Accept it. It has already happened. Don't aggravate it by becoming upset. Okay? Accept it and don't think about it. So what do? If you don't want to think, you have to do something, because the nature of the mind is to think. So you have to substitute another object for the mind. The next principle is be present. Be present means being with your senses, because your senses can only take objects of the present moment. You can see, hear, smell, taste, and feel with the body objects that are right in front of you, right here and now. Right? But your mind can do things of the past, future, and get involved in concepts and imagination and fantasies. That's why you have all these thoughts. So when you want to stop thinking, you bring the mind back to the present moment, to objects of the present moment, be aware of the sensations in the body, objectively, with acceptance. So that goes on to the third principle, be present. And then the fourth principle is O, observe the self. Now for them, although they use Buddhist principles, they don't believe in not self. They believe that there is an immortal self. So they say that when you are able to step back and look at all these things happening, previously you had this train of unwholesome thoughts that were upsetting you, and now suddenly you step back, as a witness and as an observer. And this is this self that is looking at all these things that had just happened with equanimity. And this self is not affected by the anger, by the blame, and so forth. So they say that, oh, this is your permanent, unchanging soul. And therefore, although circumstances and the thoughts may come and go and fluctuate depending on your mood and your reactions, this permanent, unchanging self, the witness, is always there. You can always step back and be one with it. But for us Buddhists, we would say, observe not self, because there's no self there. There's just the knowing mind. Where does this awareness, this knowing mind come from? We say it comes from conditioning. You learned about this, you reminded yourself to disidentify from the thoughts, you reminded yourself to be in the present moment, to step back and to watch things without reaction. But where did all this knowledge come from? From a teacher, from an instructor, from a psychotherapist. So these are all the past conditioning that has brought about this awareness. So we look at it in terms of not self, not the permanent unchanging self. It is a conditioned phenomena. Okay, so Dabo, D-A-B-O, and B means to prioritize your values. Now, like Mr. Gore said just now, he's got a lot of Buddhist meditators who are his friends, and they say always come back to your breath. That may be very good advice when you are in an intensive retreat. But when you are in the world, you have to make a decision. You cannot just apply that principle of, oh, be aware, cut, be detached. All right, you cut off yourself from that thought. You don't pursue the thought, but you still need to evaluate to see whether that thought is useful or not. Is it a productive thought? Is it an idle thought? If it is a productive thought, then you might want to pursue it. If it is an idle thought, then you just disregard it and come back to the present moment. If it is a non-productive thought, let it go, come back to the present moment. Then, when you have cooled down, you still got to make a decision. Something happens in your office, your staff does not follow your instructions, and then your client calls you up making some complaints, and you are very angry, so you're going to scold your staff. Is that more important, or is it more important to set things right immediately so that your client benefits as soon as possible? But you have to get yourself into the right frame of mind first. First of all, maybe you have to go through this process of Dabo, and then Pa. Pa here means prioritize your values. You have to now evaluate your thoughts, evaluate the situation according to certain values that you have. If you're a Buddhist, you have Buddhist ethics, Buddhist values. What is it that you want to do? Then you make a decision based on your values, right? You want to serve your client well. You want to set a good image for your company. You also don't want to show to your staff that you are a boss who cannot control his temper, or you want to present good public relations. Whatever values that you have to prioritize them, and then A means to act accordingly. Right? So this is what the Bopa is all about. So inside here, we have also the concept accepting things as they really are has got two very important conditions involved. First of all, you got to find out what do you mean by things as they really are. What is reality anyway? And how do you accept? Do you accept purely in a fatalistic way, or do you accept with understanding? Some time ago, we also had a discussion in SBS, in Sasanaraka Buddhist Sanctuary, with our monastics. We were talking about acceptance. And one of the monastics stressed that it is very important to accept with understanding, not merely accept in a fatalistic way. I will come to more concrete examples later. And because if you don't accept with understanding, you either accept things in a fatalistic way or in a subservient way, which are also not really very commendable actions. Now let's look at our early Buddhist texts. In our early Buddhist texts, there's no such phrase as accepting things as they really are. This is something new actually, although it's now very common and almost a cliche in Buddhist circles. This is quite alien to our early Buddhist scriptures. The more common phrase in the early Buddhist text is Yatha Bhuta Jnana Dasana, knowledge and vision of things as they really are. Yatha Bhuta. as they really are, jnana dasana, knowledge and vision. Now, this is more than just acceptance. When you see things as they really are, when you understand things as they really are, you don't stop there. This leads on to the next step, which is nibbida, disenchantment. And from nibbida, it leads on to dispassion, viraga. And from viraga, it will lead to liberation, vimutti. So, when we look at the progress of insight according to the Pali Canon, in the early Nikayas, there are only 4 steps. First, you have Yatha Buddha Jnana Dasana, which is knowledge and vision according to reality. Then you have Nibbida, disenchantment. Then you have Viraga, which is dispassion. And finally, you have liberation, which is Vimutti. So only 4. Nowadays, we talk about the 16 insight knowledges. This comes from the Visuddhimagga, not found in the suttas. As I said, this phrase, Yatha Buddha Jnana Dasana, does not stop short of it. It does not stop right there. It's not just acceptance, full stop. When you just accept things thinking that they are really what they are without wisdom, that could be something deluded. It could be something fatalistic. The word acceptance is also used in Buddhist texts, but in certain particular contexts. This word is called adivaseti, to accept, which is also translated sometimes as to endure, to forbear, depending on the context. For example, it is okay to accept requests that are in accordance with the Buddha's teaching, but not otherwise. For example, if somebody invites a monk to a house dana, then he can adivaseti, he can accept the invitation. If somebody offers tiger meat or elephant meat or snake meat to a monk, he cannot accept, because monks are not supposed to eat that sort of meat. So he cannot accept it. Now, in the commentaries, the word adivasana, which is the noun of to accept, acceptance, is often combined with the word kanti. You know what's kanti? Patience. Adivasana kanti. Adivasana kanti means the patience of endurance, of forbearance. To stress that patience actually implies forbearance and endurance. So, patience is also a form of acceptance, right? You are patient with someone because you accept his shortcomings. The Buddha encouraged acceptance only in 3 circumstances. When we are confronted with painful bodily feelings due to injury, for example, or sickness, or bites by insects or animals. So when you're afflicted by pain in such cases, then you accept them for what they are. There's pain, and you can't really reject this pain because it's already there. You have to learn to accept it and to watch it and to take steps in order to overcome it, but not merely by mentally rejecting it. This was the term they used when the Buddha was hurt by a splinter of rock, and it was very painful. It seems it hurt his leg very badly, but at that time it seems that he accepted the pain, endured the pain without feeling oppressed by it. That means he did not react to it in a negative way. He could just step back and observe the pain for what it is, accepting it for what it really is. Sometimes when we are confronted with painful mental feelings by, for example, someone cursing you or saying scandalous things about you, so that will create some mental reaction, something which is untrue, and then you say, how can that person say such a thing to me? You might feel hurt, you might feel angry. So the Buddha says, in such cases, you must learn to accept those words. They are just words, don't have to react to them. This is particularly true when monks sometimes go to a certain locality where people are not real Buddhists, they don't have faith in Buddhism, so they might actually say something very insulting. Many years ago, when I was still a very young monk, I was traveling in a mass plane from Bangkok back to Penang. When I stepped into the cabin, I was placed in the middle seat, and on my left was a woman, on my right was a man. So I requested the stewardess if I could switch place and sit at the corner next to the man instead. And then this Australian guy wasn't very pleased, and he said something very sarcastic. Oh, they keep away from our women. The stewardess was Chinese, so she felt a bit offended by that. I could see that she was flustered. She told off the Australian man and says, we should learn to respect one another's religion. But I just listened and smiled, and I got my seat at the corner. So sometimes monks might be confronted with such insulting remarks, especially from people who are not Buddhists. So the Buddha says, in such cases, you must learn to accept these words without reacting to them. Another time that this was used was when the Buddha finally passed away and the monks came to know about this. The monks who were anagamis and arahants who have attained the third and the fourth stages of awakening were able to take this because they knew that all sankharas, all conditioned phenomena are subject to decay and will eventually dissolve. And so they accepted this. This is a normal state of affairs. But the monks who were not yet attained to those stages, the Sotapans and the Sakadagamis, some of them were very deranged and they started to wail and weep and say, how can our Blessed One go so fast? We haven't completed our course yet. We need your advice. How can you leave us so quickly? So they were wailing. But the rest of them accepted it as it is because this is the natural course of events. So these are the three occasions, three types of circumstances where acceptance of things as they really are is encouraged. However, the Buddha emphasized that a monk should not accept defiled thoughts when they arise in his mind. Defiled thoughts means thoughts that are associated with attachment, with desire, with likes, and thoughts that are associated with aversion, with anger, with sadness, sorrow, disappointment, frustration. All these negative thoughts that arise in him should not be entertained by him. He should not accept them for what they are. In fact, he should recognize them and immediately abandon them. Now, abandoning does not mean rejecting. We must make a very, very clear distinction between abandoning and rejecting. Rejecting means trying to push it away. Abandoning means not pursuing that thought. Not pursuing that thought means you don't push it away, you change the subject. You come back to the present moment, be aware of present objects. Right? If you are rejecting it, then you will be saying, oh, I shouldn't have such thoughts. I'm such a bad person. I'm such a bad monk. That is rejecting it. Go away, pushing it away. How can you push the thought away? That is rejecting. Abandoning means not pursuing it, not entertaining it. Immediately recognizing that it is an unwholesome thought and then coming back to the present moment or to your meditation object. So, as I said in the beginning just now, the phrase acceptance of things as they really are has a catch there, because what do you mean by things as they really are? What is reality? What is your understanding of reality? Because there are so many levels of reality. Do you know, neuroscientists have found out that our brain is actually exposed to millions of bytes of information, but it can only process a very, very small percentage of it. Do you know, for example, that our frequency range that we can hear is very limited? When you blow a dog whistle, the dog can hear, but you can't. It doesn't mean that the frequency doesn't exist. You have handphones and you can receive a call through the vibrations that are going in the air, traveling in the air, but you can't hear it with your ears. Doesn't mean that the frequency doesn't exist, right? So there are a lot of things that we cannot perceive with our senses, and that's also part of reality. So what do you mean by things as they really are? How do you know what they really are? You wouldn't know. So how can you accept many things if we can't really know what they are? Right, so let's look at reality in terms of a range. We have low-end reality and a high-end reality. Buddhists talk about the ultimate reality, particularly Theravada Buddhists, based on the Abhidhamma. They call it Paramatta Satcha. And they call conventional reality as Sammuti Satcha. Satcha means truth or reality. Now, Paramatta Satcha and Sammuti Satcha, these two terms are very Theravada because these two terms are not found in the suttas, not in the Pali suttas. In fact, when I look at the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the establishment of mindfulness, which is supposed to be a treatise or discourse on how to practice vipassana, the word vipassana is not even mentioned in that sutta, for one thing. And secondly, the Buddha never made any distinction between Paramatta and Sammuti Satcha in the sutta. There is a combination of concepts and so-called ultimate reality. According to the Theravada Abhidhamma, ultimate reality means only 4 things: Rupa, Citta, Cetasika, and Nibbana. Rupa is form or materiality. Form not necessarily only in what we see, but in what we can perceive through our 5 senses. All these are under Rupa. Then we have mind, consciousness, and Cetasika, mental factors, states of mind that are associated with our consciousness. And then finally we have Nibbana, the ultimate reality that goes beyond life and death, which is the ultimate happiness, the greatest peace. So these are the 4. In order to reach or arrive at Nibbana, one has to contemplate the first 3 realities, first 3 ultimate realities: Rupa or form or materiality, mind and mental factors. Why? Because according to the Abhidhamma, these are conditioned phenomena, and they are also conditioning phenomena. They are conditioned into existence, and they also condition other conditioned phenomena. So they are conditioned as well as they condition. That's one thing. And because they are conditioned phenomena, they exhibit the 3 characteristics, the 3 universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, and anatta: impermanence, suffering, and not self. So if we keep on looking at these 3 ultimate realities in terms of anicca, dukkha, anatta, then eventually we see them according to what they really are. This is what we call yatha bhuta jnana dasana, knowledge and vision according to reality. We see them according to their true nature of arising and passing away from moment to moment, and being unsatisfactory because they are beyond our control. And they are also anatta, not self, because they don't have any independent self-existence. They always occur dependent on causes and conditions. They are not independent. They are always changing all the time. So when we see that, then this leads on to disenchantment. Because we see that everything is arising and passing away from moment to moment, is unsatisfactory, there's no self there, then we no longer cling anymore. We no longer crave. And we become disenchanted, wearied by all these things. And when we are weary, then we have dispassion. We let go. And when we let go, then we can be liberated from the clutch of these defilements. Now, this stresses very much on experiential knowledge and vision. It's very obvious, isn't it? Because all of you know that everything is impermanent. You know that when you are born, you will die one day, you'll get sick. Right? You know also that things don't last. And yet, when your favorite vase falls to pieces, you scratch your brand new car, don't you feel heartache? You feel very disappointed or angry or upset because things don't go according to what you expect them to. But that expectation is actually a delusion, isn't it? Because you know that everything is impermanent. You know only intellectually, but you don't really experience them from moment to moment in all aspects of your life. So if you're able to maintain a continuity of awareness regarding the impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not selfness of your mind, of mental states, of your sense objects, then this will lead to knowledge and vision of things according to reality, then to disenchantment, to dispassion, to letting go, and finally to liberation. So the whole path of learning to accept reality for what it is means that you got to have personal experience of it. And before you have the personal experience, you need to have the theoretical knowledge. If you don't study the Buddhist scriptures, you haven't heard any Dharma talks about these things, how would you be able to look out for them in this way? So the Buddha always said, it's important to first of all listen to the Dhamma, and then listen with proper attention, remember the Dhamma, and put it into practice. Then only can you get results. Okay, according to the Abhidhamma, concepts such as names, shapes, direction, time, groupings, etc. do not exhibit the universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta. And they don't exhibit the characteristic of arising and passing away. Look at the name, a concept, for example. The concept itself does not actually exhibit the characteristic of arising and passing away. The thought does, of course, but not the concept. For example, name. The name of Tunku Abdul Rahman is still as fresh and as clear as it was when he still was alive. But he's already long dead, right? But his name is still there. His name doesn't disappear. As long as it is engraved somewhere and people can read the words, the name will still be there. It doesn't arise and pass away from moment to moment. So things like direction, north, south, east, west. You may use different words and different languages to name the directions, but they're still directions. Therefore, they say that apart from these three types of ultimate realities, sense objects, mind and mental factors, all these other things which are classified under conventional truth or concepts cannot be the object for vipassana. If you observe them, you can't see the three universal characteristics, and therefore it will not lead you to liberation. However, we cannot deny that thoughts are also conditioned and conditioning phenomena that exhibit the universal characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta. Thoughts are not the mind. Thoughts are not mental factors. Thoughts are products of the mind, products of mental factors. And thoughts have a content, and the contents are all conceptual in nature, right? Most of our thoughts are verbal in nature. We think in words or in pictures, and these are conceptual. But can we deny that what we think is a result of present circumstances and past conditioning? You cannot deny, right? For example, the other day, Brother Gaur was driving me to Lunduk, and he saw a car in front of him. I cannot say the brand name because I'll be sued in court. He saw a car and then he said, "Oh, don't buy that sort of car. I got that sort of car and now it's in the workshop and I don't think ever it's going to work again." Okay, let's analyze those thoughts. Isn't that thought a conditioned phenomena? Right? How did it come about? That thought came about because he noticed the car in front of him. Right? Because his eyes caught sight of the car and he recognized the car, and that triggered off a memory of a similar car that he had. All right? And that also triggered off the memory of the experiences he had with the car, and now the car is still in the workshop and he fears that it will not be of any use any longer. So because of that, he advised, don't buy that sort of car again. Never buy that sort of car because you're going to end up in the same way. Now, this thought came about because of past conditioning. Something that happened in the past, you remember it, but it came about because it was triggered by a present circumstance. You saw it with your eyes. If you didn't see it, you wouldn't have thought about it. So that thought itself, although it is not the mind, it is not mental factor, it is still a conditioned phenomena, and it still exhibits the characteristic of anicca. It arises and passes away, right? And it also is unsatisfactory in the sense that you cannot control it. It just came by itself. And thirdly, it doesn't have an independent self-existence because it arose dependent on the eye in contact with the eye object, which triggered off a memory of some experiences that he had in the past. So it's all dependent. That thought is dependent on so many causes and conditions. So it is also sankhara. Okay, another example. Then Brother Gaur fetched me back from Lundu to KDV yesterday. And when he arrived, we were unloading our stuff. And then Sister Dhammika came. And then I noticed that both of them didn't address one another. So I felt a bit uneasy. But that is also a conditioned phenomena, right? Why did I have such a thought? And why did I feel uneasy? First of all, that thought came about because I noticed that they didn't address one another. They didn't greet one another. If I had been very busy unloading my stuff and I didn't notice this, that thought wouldn't have arisen, firstly. Secondly, why should they greet one another? There's an assumption on my part that they should greet one another. Sometimes when you know each other so well, you don't have to greet each other. So my feeling of uneasiness came about because of the assumption that they should greet one another. Anyway, he didn't greet Bin also, my kapiya, Brother Bin. So maybe it's her nature. Right? So my uneasiness came about because of all these assumptions. If I did not question my thought and looked into how this thought came about, I might feel uneasy for a long time. Hey, they should, actually they should, and they'll be keep on turning in my mind. Here's also another story that one of my devotees told me. He said he was listening to this sermon by an imam. Early in the morning, a man boarded the bus with his boy, his young child. They sat in the bus, and this child was wailing for the very moment they sat until they disembarked. So the imam said, if you were sitting in the bus, what would be your reaction? Different people will have different reactions. Some people might say, look at this man, can't even control his child and is causing such a nuisance, public nuisance. Doesn't he have any consideration? You might have these thoughts going on in your mind. You might even have half a mind getting up and spanking the child. How come the father is not taking any disciplinary action to silence him for the sake of the people in the bus? All these thoughts could have gone on in your mind. And even if these thoughts had gone on in your mind, and then later you find out that the child was crying so badly because the mother just passed away, then you will feel sorry, right? For having judged that person in that way. So look at this. This is also due to present circumstances and past conditioning. Why do you have such thoughts? Because the child is wailing and getting your attention. And why do you think that the father should do such things? Because you have been conditioned to think that people should be considerate. Parents should discipline the child for the sake of public consideration. A lot of times our thoughts arise because of these assumptions. And sometimes these assumptions are not true and they're not accurate. And if we do not inquire or question these assumptions and the rationale behind our thoughts, which are the cause for our feelings, then we suffer unnecessarily. So these are just some examples to show you that our thoughts, although they do not belong strictly to the category of ultimate reality as defined by the Abhidhamma, they are also conditioned phenomena. They also condition other conditioned phenomena. So they are also, in a sense, if you look at them in terms of anicca, dukkha, anatta, in terms of impermanence, suffering or unsatisfactoriness and not self, that can also lead you to happiness, to contentment, to understanding the true nature of your thoughts and accepting the thoughts for what they are by not rejecting them, because if you understand, then you can accept with understanding. When you accept with understanding, then you can learn to let go. However, there are many situations and circumstances in our life which are also conditioned phenomena. They may not necessarily be ultimate reality in the sense that they are not rupa or citta or cittasika. So many conditions, for example, if someone meets with an accident, why did the accident happen? Because of causes and conditions, right? You can see that it is also something that is subject to anicca, to dukkha and anatta. Same thing, it's a conditioned phenomena. If you are able to look at things that way and to keep on reflecting continuously or continually in your daily life, in all aspects or in as many aspects of your life as possible, then you can reinforce this idea, this perception of impermanence, of unsatisfactoriness, and of not self. When you develop this perception, then the Buddha says this will lead to disenchantment, to letting go, dispassion, and finally to liberation. In many suttas, the Buddha says, monks, develop the perception of impermanence, develop the perception of not self. Monks, dwell observing impermanence again and again, dwell observing unsatisfactoriness again and again, dwell observing non-self again and again. And as I said in the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the establishment of mindfulness, the Buddha did not make a distinction between ultimate reality and conceptual reality as done by the Abhidhamma. There's a mixture of concepts and ultimate reality in the Satipatthana. Back to real life, whatever that means, to the world of illusion which we all take to be so real. We have to exercise discretion to distinguish whether to accept without change or with change, something which we believe to be real. Otherwise, we will end up being fatalistic or apathetic. For example, look at your physical appearance. Your body build. You were born with that sort of body build. If you don't accept it for what it is, you're going to end up being very frustrated. Right? For example, I can eat as much as I want to, but I can never become like Mary. And she can go on a fast and she can never become like me. Right? Because there are certain things you can't change. And so we have to accept this for what it is. Well, you can say the conventional truth, but still we have to accept it. How about your complexion? What do you think? Can you do anything about it? You can, ladies got a lot of facial makeup, some things to smoothen your skin, even you have a lot of pimples. And one of the best things you can do is to use urine therapy, use urine to massage your body and your skin and your hair, and you get very good complexion. So this is something you can change. But you have to use the discretion, what you can change and what you cannot change. Even Michael Jackson, look at him. He has a complete facelift and is completely different from what he was when he was a kid. How about hair color? In the old days, if you are born black hair, you have black hair. But now, with black hair, you can turn a blonde, right? You can turn a brunette. You can turn whatever color you want to. Many years ago, when I was staying in Sarawak, Brother Gore was very, very concerned about his son going through that adolescent period, and he dyed his hair in patches and strips of different colors. And he was very upset. Why must he do that? He didn't question that his thought at that time. Why not? That was what Ajahn Brahm would tell you. Why not? Why do you have expectations of how a person should behave? You have your own standards and other people have their own standards. I have also got a very bad experience with my father. When he was still alive, at that time I was in first year in university and I was sporting long hair. My father was a very old-fashioned man. He didn't like long hair and he asked me to cut my hair a couple of times. I didn't. And so one day he gave me an ultimatum. So one day I sat down with him and then I talked to him. I said, look, my hair is not your hair. If you want to cut your hair short, you can cut it short. If you want to leave mine long, I can leave it long. What's wrong? He wasn't very happy and he said, well, there are a lot of things that we want to do but he cannot do. And he gave me his list of grouses that he wants to do but he cannot do. But anyway, after that incident, although it was not a very pleasant conversation, although we trashed it out, a lot of emotions were involved, he left me alone. At least I took a stand. Okay, anyway, certain things you can accept and some things you can't. Okay, so now a lot of people have their hair falling off and turning grey. They like to dye it black, or they want to put on a wig or put on some lotion to grow back their hair. Why? Vanity. What's wrong with grey hair? After my father passed away, when I was in my second year and third year, my mother's hair began to turn grey. Nowadays, people's hair turn grey sooner. The old days, not so soon, probably because of junk food and EMF radiation. Anyway, she was already in her 60s and started to turn grey, and then she was putting all this dye. At those times, the dyes were not so sophisticated, and some of them were caustic, caused a lot of skin problems. So I told her, look, Mom, you're already so old. Why cao sua ji chui? Now, who are you trying to seduce, What's wrong with grey hair? You look great. You look more elegant and more gracious. And then she said, really? I said, yeah. So after that, she started dyeing her hair. And she really looked great. Grey hair also looks nice. It depends on how you look at it, your perspective. And then recently when I was in Tawau, I met my old friend, childhood friend, an Indian. And I saw that his hair was so beautifully black. And I said, hey, what do you do? How come our hairs are all getting grey but yours is still so black? He says, my hair has been falling off and now I'm actually wearing a wig. He said, when I was younger, I had to grow a moustache and wear a beard because I look too young. And I want to do business, I must look old. So now I shave everything off because I want to look young. So not accepting things according to what they are. Another thing is your temperament. There are various ways of classifying temperaments. But I find this fourfold way of classification from the Greeks very interesting and very applicable also. The first one is called a sanguine. The second is a choleric. The third is a melancholic. And the fourth is a phlegmatic. These are very big words. If you want to remember in a simple way, The first one is a person who wants to do things the fun way. The second one is he wants to do things his way, my way. The third one is one who wants to do things the best way. And the fourth one is the one who wants to do things the easiest way. So imagine these four people get together, what a great fun it will be. But you do have all these other people, particularly in societies, in organizations. Yeah? And there's this thing about opposites attract. Sometimes also when people fall in love, it's because of their opposite qualities. For example, a melancholic is the one who wants to do things the best way, is a thinker. He always likes to think and do things in the best way, and he is a perfectionist. Whereas a phlegmatic is the one who wants to do things the easiest way. He's a very sloppy sort of person. He's very untidy and very sloppy. Whereas this guy, a melancholic, the one who wants to do things the best way, is a very tidy person, very meticulous. So they sort of attract each other, fall in love, they get married, and then after they get married, they start to quarrel. Why? Why is your room always in such a mess? For goodness sake, tidy up lah, and so forth, quarreling one another. Because you can't stand each other's personality after a long time staying together. Right? So if you have landed yourself in such a situation, you must learn to accept things for what they really are. You already weathered yourself for life, and then you have your children to think about, and you can't do otherwise but to accept. These are just four main classifications, and it doesn't mean that a person is 100% one type. You could be a combination, 50% of this, 10% of this, 10% of that, and 20% of that. So it's more complicated than what it seems. So see which is more predominant in you. Sometimes it's a combination of 3 or 2 or even all of them. And you may also have children who have such personalities. One child may be so different from the other. One might be an introvert, the other one an extrovert. And if you want to be like the other, you're just like trying to ask a durian to be a papaya. So you must learn how to accept that also. Yeah? Acceptance for things as they really are. Yeah, there are only certain things we can change and some things we cannot. What we cannot change, well, leave it and accept. Change yourself. Change your attitude, your expectations, your assumptions. If you can change another person, very good. If you can't change the other person, you have to change yourself. Right? If you're in a work environment and you cannot change the other person, your colleague or your boss, then either you change yourself or you change your job, or else your mind will change your body. And you get into trouble, you get cancer or whatever, a tumor or whatever. Right? So you need discretion to be able to decide whether you want to accept things as they really are, or there is some chance of changing. But if you're a meditator, particularly one who has trained yourself to watch your mind and your thoughts, how your thoughts come about, how you react habitually in certain ways, then you can actually make a difference. If you understand how your thoughts are formed, you understand your habitual tendencies, and you want to correct yourself, you can, to a certain extent, more than what a non-meditator can do. So if you want to be really extra careful, then you must learn to let go. For example, I'm a combination of some of these things. And one of my strengths or weakness is being a perfectionist. I want to get things done in the best way. But since I've been watching my mind, sometimes I can see all these perfectionist tendencies arising in me, wanting to do things in the perfect way. Then I will assess the situation. Look at the constraints. Do I have the time to spare to get this done in this way or not? If I have, and then I can indulge in it. If not, then I have to learn to let go. Yeah, particularly when I'm working with other people. When I first started SBS, for example, I was very perfectionist, and the contractors were all very scared of me because I always make sure that everything is according to spec. If anything goes wrong, they have to redo. So I got a bad reputation in Taiping. Say, you want to work for this monk, you better be careful. You cannot cheat him, And then later on, I began to let go. found out that sometimes you don't have to be that perfect. A bit crooked, never mind. Even if it's not 90 degrees corner, if it's 92 degrees, it's okay lah. Especially it's not too big a square. Okay. And I'm particularly impressed by KDV. When I went to see the toilet, all the floor tiles are all very square one. Usually the rooms are sengit a bit. When you put the tiles, you can know they're sengit because the tiles don't align. But then you see all the tiles in KDV, oh, they're really fantastic. Very well aligned. So I heard that the contractor was quite a professional, high-class contractor, and he's done a lot of very big jobs before, and he wanted to do a good job. Don't know who the supervisor is. Whoever he or she is, I must say sadhu. Okay, so another thing is I noticed that my students also have a combination of these 4 characters, and they are different, and I have to treat them differently. I cannot have the same standard. I have more than double standards. 4 standards. Some I will have to let go, some I don't, because he's by nature sloppy. You can't ask him to be otherwise. If I want to, I have to say that again and again and be patient about it. Sometimes another student is very perfectionist. When I want to get something done, he will try to do the best way. So he will take maybe 2-3 weeks to figure out to do it the best way. Sometimes I cannot wait for him. I just take it and do myself. I do it the hard way and I finish it in 1 day. Well, I mean, people are just born that way. Yeah? You have to accept them for what they are, particularly if you want to work with them. But sometimes, because of personality clash, sometimes you really cannot work together, then it's best to separate. So this is also another thing. Brother Gaur was saying it would be good if we could unite all the English-speaking Buddhists in Kuching. Since we are such a small group and we are actually going around, the same group going around from one center to another, why not we just unite all and do things together? That's very idealistic. And that's a very commendable state of mind, very commendable thought. But we have to look at it. It is true that they are all split up now. It's true also that it will be good to unite them. What is the best way of doing it? Do you yourself have the capability of doing it? Or do you need some external sources to come and help? You have to explore various ways of doing it. If you want to be very fatalistic and apathetic, you say, well, there's a way it is, and let things be as they are. Right? That's accepting things as they really are. But that's being fatalistic about it. Right? If you want to be proactive and you want to seek constructive solution to that, then you have to come up with ideas how to do it. And to give you a tip, it is usually a charismatic monk who can do it. People tend to look up to monks, and if you are a charismatic and open-minded monk who is able to command the respect of a lot of people, then you can unite people. Otherwise, it's very difficult. I mean, you look at the country, it's the same, isn't it? How did Mao Zedong manage to unite the whole of China? Because of his personality. But nowadays also, you've got marketing. You got good personality, charisma, and you got good marketing also, it can work. So you can apply lots of techniques. Let's look at health issues. We have certain chronic ailments. Some people have chronic ailments and they cannot cure for years and years. Would you accept them for what they really are? That they are incurable? Or would you keep on looking for ways and means to cure yourself? Well, there are 2 ways of looking at this. You can accept things as they really are, in the sense that these chronic ailments, when they come, you don't reject them. But you don't stop there. You still try various ways and means to cure them. But when you have to go through the suffering, you have to endure and accept the suffering as it comes. You'll be surprised. I'm actually in the process of revising a book that I translated more than 25 years ago. It's called Dhamma Therapy. It's a compilation of cases of meditators who are doing intensive vipassana meditation, and they cured themselves of many illnesses. Many of them were chronic diseases that had been with them for 10 years, 20 years, and they could just cure that disease in a retreat. 20-year illness can be cured in a 2-month retreat. When the book comes in, you'll see how interesting these cases are, and maybe it can give you some inspiration. There's also another thing about introduction of Wi-Fi technology. And also scientists have come to this conclusion now that the use of handphones will also increase the risk of brain cancer in you. Children nowadays are using handphones. you'll find that in 20 years' time, there will be an increase in brain tumors and brain cancer because of the EMF. So certain things we can accept for what they are, certain things we cannot accept, then we have to fight for it. But we have to assess the situation, evaluate the situation to see whether the reality that we perceive is accurate or not, and look at it from various angles. Also, in this world, there's so much political and social injustice, right? For example, social injustices. There's unequal distribution of wealth and usage of resources in the world. What can we do about it? Do you just accept it as it really is and just be apathetic about it? Or is there anything that you can do about it? This is talking on a global scale. A lot of things on a global scale we cannot really help. Like the global economic recession, although it has barely scratched Sarawak, it's going on in many parts of the world and hit America very badly. I just saw a week or so ago in the internet that there are a lot of tent cities now cropping up in the States because people can't afford to pay their housing loans anymore. They are retrenched, and so they have no house to stay and they have to stay in tents. Also, 1 out of 50 children are homeless. Fantastic, in the States. It has really reached quite a deplorable state. So what can we do about this? This is something very global. High economics, which is beyond our ability to do anything. So this is something that we have to accept. Yeah, this is what happened in the States, and that's what it is. What we can do for ourselves is to prepare for it if it does come here. Also, mindset. There's also a sort of fatalistic view that some scientists have about genes and DNA. They say that your whole life is programmed by your genes and your DNA, right? But to what extent are we programmed, and to what extent can we reprogram or reformat our DNA and genes? Someone posted this in the internet, in our e-group. It's an interesting article about the research findings of one scientist by the name of Dr. Bruce Lipton. In 1982, he began to examine the principles of quantum physics and how they might be integrated into the understanding of the cell's information processing systems. In the course of his research, he produced breakthrough studies on the cell membrane which revealed that the outer layer of the cell was an organic homologue of a computer chip, the cell's equivalent of a brain. So each cell actually has something like a brain in itself, a mini brain for each cell. His research at Stanford University's School of Medicine between 1987 and 1992 revealed that the environment operating through the membrane controlled the behavior and physiology of the cell, turning genes on and off. His discoveries, which ran counter to the established scientific view that life is controlled by the genes, presaged one of today's most important fields of study, the science of epigenetics. What he's trying to say is how we react to situations can actually change the genes in our body. Rather than the genes controlling us, our mindset, our attitude, the way we respond and react to external stimuli will actually reshape or reprogram our genes. So it's so important to have mind development, to be able to watch your thoughts, see how your thoughts are formed, and don't simply believe all your thoughts. You must investigate so that you can change your habit patterns, change your mindset, your attitude towards life. If you don't watch your thoughts, you don't understand how your thoughts are formed, then you become a slave of your habitual tendencies. But if you understand, then you can undo and become a master of your mind. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that we cannot simply accept things according to our perception of what they really are, because our perception of what they are may not be what they really are. because our perception is limited by a lot of parameters. Our rationale, our data, our methodology may not really be sufficient enough to give us a true picture of what reality is. So we can only work according to our means. So before we accept our perception of what reality is, we have to first of all determine the level of reality that we are confronting. And then we have to evaluate to see whether it is within our scope to make any positive changes. Then we make changes according to Buddhist ethics and principles. And all these require wise attention and mindfulness and full awareness, which I have been stressing since I came to Kuching. We need to remember all these principles. We need to exercise full awareness in terms of evaluating whether a decision that we are going to make is going to be beneficial, whether it's appropriate, whether it's relevant, and whether it's realistic or not. So we cannot simply accept things in a fatalistic way, but we must use our discretion to accept what is not within our power to change, and to accept that we can change certain things, and then we act based on Buddhist ethics and principles. Okay, so I'd like to end the talk here. If any comments or questions, please feel free to express yourself. Yes, any comments or questions?
Bhante, my question is related to the subject that I think most of us are aware of, the Mayan era, the year 2012. The date given is 21st December 2012, when we might expect some crisis. So can Bhante advise us how to accept this so-called subject as it approaches us, I think quite soon?
The question is about the so-called end of the Mayan calendar, which is supposed to end on the 21st of December 2012, whereby it is predicted that there will be some crisis, some catastrophe that will affect the whole planet Earth. And so the question is, how would I advise on how we can accept that or face that or prepare for that? I understand that Venerable Mahinda had a seminar recently. Alert, did you attend that?
Yeah, I did.
You did?
Yeah.
Ah, then you should share with us. I didn't attend that.
Bhante, in your spiritual, just your advice in the spiritual.
Okay, my advice from the spiritual point of view. From the spiritual point of view, someone asked me whether I really believe that it will happen. And I said, I neither believe nor disbelieve that it will happen, but it is a possibility. When you talk about quantum theory, everything is a matter of possibilities and probabilities. But it is not an unfounded possibility, because those people who are advocating the very high possibility of this occurring also make research in astronomy, making observations of what's happening to our world right now. They know the position of the earth and so forth. What can we do is to do more wholesome deeds, practice more metta, loving kindness, compassion. Maybe as a consolation, there's also another theory which says that this is the age of Aquarius, Aquarian age. And the Aquarian age is the time when human consciousness is making an unprecedented elevation, being uplifted and elevated. That's why now there's an unprecedented interest in spirituality, something that has not happened in the whole history of mankind, whereby lots and lots of people are getting to be very spiritual, not only Buddhists, all sorts of spiritual systems. And they say that because of this change of human consciousness going upwards, ascending of the human consciousness, and because the planet Earth is already now overpopulated, nature has its own way of correcting the imbalance. So, one of the ways is all these natural catastrophes are happening, and they are eliminating a lot of human population. Planet Earth cannot sustain itself any longer at the way we are reaping its resources. So what happens is, while nature is trying to correct this imbalance, those who are not spiritually matured would have to go first, make way for those who are spiritually mature. So if you really so you know what, you get what I mean? Yeah? So you better be more spiritually inclined. Get your priorities right. Personalize your values towards spirituality rather than materialism. Then you'll be the survivors. Okay?